morning, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever time zone you're in. Welcome to the 10th FEZANA talks. This week, today we have two very interesting and accomplished authors. And this talk is collaboration with FIRES. And so I would introduce Aban Rustomji, the co-chair and the founding co-chair of FIRES, which is a FEZANA information research and education system. And with that, I hand over the mic to Aban for moderating this talk and introducing the speakers.
Okay, thank you, Arzan, and hello everybody, and greetings from Houston. Thank you so much for attending today's FEZANA talk, and Arzan, thank you for starting this new digital initiative that has really gathered up a lot of buzz, and it's been very interesting. And as Arzan said, I'm co-chair of FIRES, which is a committee of FEZANA. And FEZANA stands for FEZANA Information Research Education Service. We are based in Houston. FIRES is a centralized collection of books, manuscripts, literature, artifacts, primarily pertaining to our Zartushti faith, culture, and history. We hold lecture series.
Watermelon. Oh my God, it looks like foam.
We are privileged to house Dr. Dastudala's Memorabilia Trust, and recently we acquired books and artifacts from Professor K.D. Irani's trust that are on display. We have a website, so do please check us out. Now, today's FEZANA talk is a book chat with two dynamic and distinguished authors, Thrity Umrigar and Nawaz Merchant. They are our Zartushti writers that write about us, but their stories have vast and universal interest and appeal. And the reason is the stories are of the truth, of the hopes, the promise of a new land, the glory of the past, and the path we sometimes give up. When we immigrate and come to new lands, we give up our language. Sometimes we definitely give up our old neighborhood, our family, our friends, our routines, and sometimes even our names. But in essence, it's about one thing, and that is moving forwards and the importance of making a choice and taking a stand. So let me introduce you to our novelists. Born in Mumbai, India, Thrity Umrigar is the best-selling author of 8 novels, a memoir, and 3 children's books. Her books have been translated into several languages and published in over 15 countries. She is a distinguished university professor of English at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio. Thrity will be talking about her book, Sugar and Milk, that was just recently released on October the 6th. And Friday, I got this delightful copy in the mail. Thank you, Thrity. Our second author is Nawaz Merchant, who writes under the pen name of Nev March. Her debut novel, Murder in Old Bombay, is a historical fiction based on a true story and set against the vibrant backdrop of colonial India. Nawaz is the winner of the Minotaur Books Mystery Writers of America. Also born in Mumbai, Nawaz has been writing since the age of 11. Her previously published stories in children's magazines and has won awards in writing contests for historical fiction. Nawaz teaches creative writing classes at Rutgers University, Osher Institute of Learning, Lifelong Learning. She balances her writing and career with teaching as well as her work with nonprofits, Shine and Inspire and FEZANA. There will be a Q&A today, so please post questions in the chat section. Thrity may not be able to stay much beyond her session, so please address any questions you have for her during her talk. And having done the introduction, let's start with Thrity. Thrity, welcome. Sugar and Milk is classified as a children's book. However, it will resonate with readers of all ages. It's the most enduring and beloved Parsi legend, So please share with us your perspective on writing this book and tell us what you have to say.
Okay. Thank you very much, first of all of you, for being here from different time zones, different countries. Special thanks to Aban. I think this program is going to be pulled off flawlessly, but if only all of you knew how much back and forth and how hard Aban has worked to put this together. I think Nawaz is probably the only other person who understands what has been happening behind the scenes. So thank you, Aban, for what you have done. I'm delighted to tell you a little bit about how and why I wrote Sugar and Milk. So, of course, this is a story that I think any Parsi child probably heard for the first time when they were 2 or 3 years old. It's a story, it's a sort of origin legend, if you will, that we all grew up hearing. And for those of us who either as young children or as young adults immigrated either to the US or to the UK or wherever, the story has a double significance, right? Because it's a story of how our ancestors landed from, what used to be Persia to India, how they were and why they were let in as I guess, political refugees. And then for all of us to have then come to this country as immigrants. For me personally, I came to this country when I was 21 years old as a grad student, as many of us did, I suppose. And this story has always acted as a kind of blueprint, if you will. It's always acted as a kind of book about how to conduct yourself when you are a newcomer to somebody else's home or somebody else's country. And I think it has served all of us well in sort of giving us a path as to how to fit in, how to accommodate a new culture, how to embrace a new culture, but also how to conduct ourselves. Many years ago, when I became a novelist and started writing fiction for adults, I would do a lot of book talks, and I would often end my book talks by telling this story. And when I would do that, it was more in the context of, in a sense, the moral of the story, if you will, about sweetening the lives of a community around you. I would apply that to being a writer, because in a way, all of us who engage with literature, either as readers or as writers, in effect, that is what we are doing. We are trying to enlighten, we are trying to brighten, we are trying to sweeten the lives of the people around us, community around us. And I started noticing one thing during these book talks. Every single time I told this story to what was predominantly an American audience, people would have a kind of visible reaction to this story. People would start smiling. They would sigh. You could feel something in them like softening. They would start applauding. And I realized, my God, this is a story that is not just unique to Parsis or Zoroastrians. This is a story that has a kind of universal application to it. And why is that so? Because ultimately, it's a story about kindness. It's a story about generosity. It's a story about taking joy in hospitality and diversity. So this went on for several years. It never occurred to me to turn this into a children's book. And then the last 4 years happened in our national life. And suddenly immigrants were being demonized, and I don't have to tell you everything that's been going on. And one day I literally woke up and I thought, my God, this old story has such deep resonance with our lives today. And, I told myself this, I've been wasting my time telling the story to adults. Adults don't need to hear it. Children need to hear this story, because you have to catch them while they are young, while they are impressionable, and children will respond naturally to these lessons of kindness and generosity and hospitality. And that's how That's why I wrote this book. And that is my deepest, deepest hope, that it provides a kind of counter narrative to what the national discourse around immigration has been these past few years. So that's a very long answer.
That's a beautiful answer, and you've certainly enlarged our visibility of our Zoroastrian stories, that our beloved story is. And your book is available at Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble or wherever books are being sold. And as I told you that I was so thrilled to receive the copy in the mail. And I just wanted to ask you that how did you collaborate with the illustrator to get all these beautiful pictures in? And if you could just give me a second to put it on, I want to show, while you're talking, maybe I can share the screen and show a few pages of how beautiful this, this book illustrations are. So let me just see what I can do here. And I'm sharing that. Am I on now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So my full screen, there we are. So here is Thrity. Do you want to just comment on the?
Sure, sure. So what I basically did with this book is, it's a story within a story. And the story starts with a young child who for whatever reason has come to America on her own, lives with her aunt and uncle, and is terribly homesick and misses her family back, presumably in India, because obviously she's a Zoroastrian child, as you can see. I hope you noticed the rug with the good thoughts, good words.
Yes,
that's one of my favorite aspects of this illustration. So the story starts in modern times. In a way to sort of get her out of her funk, her aunt one day takes her for a walk and tells her this ancient story as a way of inspiring her. And indeed, the book ends with this child having a she literally sees the world around her, in her case, America, with new eyes, and realizes that it's up to her to make life good for herself, but also for people around her. So this is one of my favorite illustrations. And the genius of this illustration is, the illustrator is somebody I have never met. Usually what happens is when a publisher buys a picture book from the author, at some point they give you a choice of maybe 3 or 4 illustrators, and shows you copies of their work and asks you who you like. And based on her past work, I immediately zeroed in on Koa, who is this young woman in Vietnam, who I'm sure has never worked in this kind of style before. And we literally communicated with one another through my giving her directions. This is a very, Aban, maybe go to that next slide.
Okay.
So this is the story, within the story, this is the story of the actual legend. And I would just give her kind of impressionistic kind of feedback via my editor, saying, tell her to look at Persian miniature art, tell her to look at really rich Oriental rugs and like the lushness and the color of those tapestries. Tell her I want something to that effect. And this is, to me, yes, it's a children's book, but this is a work of art. This is an art book as far as
it truly is. And I'm going to go to the next slide too.
Yeah, look at this. I can take 0 credit for this because I cannot even draw stick figures. Honestly, that's the truth. So I'm in awe.
I think you need to take credit because you clearly, told the illustrator what was in your mind, and she went and did exactly what you wanted for you to do.
Yeah, but the talent is all hers. The fact that she could do this, I just, and again, if it is a story about the joy of diversity, think about this, an Indian Zoroastrian writer from India living in America corresponds over the thousands of miles with a young artist in Vietnam, using a white American editor in New York as the conduit. I mean, the book itself is an example, really, of how beautiful life can be if we would just let it be, you know? So anyway.
And of course, I love the dedication treaty, which is on the first page, but it was my favorite one, so I put it in the last. I don't know if you wanted to say that, but it's so beautifully done too. So these, I'm going to stop the share part of it now, but thank you for sharing that with us. And
Absolutely.
Thrity, is it a good time to be a writer with all the stuff that's going on, and we're in the pandemic mode and we're at home, and
yeah,
read books more and is there any insight on that? Or?
It's actually a great question, but let me do a politician act here, and instead of directly answering your question, let me just hold out this book called Binny's Diwali, which literally came out this September. This is just random good luck that I've had two children's books in 2 months. And this is a book published by Scholastic, and as the title suggests, it's a book about Diwali. And what I found fascinating about doing this book is I literally felt like that the two strands of my life, you know, being Indian and being Zoroastrian, both sort of almost by random good luck came together, you know. And Diwali, of course, is the Hindu festival that I think most of us who grew up in India, at one way or the other, we participated and we celebrated it. At least the India that I grew up in, or the Bombay that I grew up in, was this very resolutely secular place, you know, where we celebrated everything. We celebrated every national holiday that there was, with no attention paid to, you know, religion and caste and creed and all those things. Anyway, Aban, to answer your question, is it a good time to be a writer? It's always a good time to be a writer. Whether it's a good time to be published or not is a whole different animal, right? And you know, clearly things are difficult right now. They are difficult in the film industry. You know, a couple of my books have been, you know, people are interested in making movies out of them, but the movie industry in both the US and India right now is absolutely flat. Nobody is buying new scripts or new projects. So that hurts. And clearly, because New York started out as the center of the pandemic, I mean, clearly everything is an upheaval, you know? Mm-hmm. So it's probably not a great time to be, you know, sending out books for publishing. But I think any day that you're breathing is a good day to be a writer, you know, because one of my all-time favorite sayings is something that apparently Picasso said once. He said, you know, if they were to imprison me and take away all my tools of art, he said, I would paint or draw on the prison walls with my spit, you know, and that to me is the essence of being any kind of an artist, you know, that you do it not because it's easy, but you do it despite whatever conditions that you might be facing, you know.
So Thrity, you're getting a lot of comments on your book and the artwork, and there's a question, and the question is on the political side of it too, and it's from Firoza Jasawala. And the question to you is that as a professor of post-colonial literature, Firoza has used the story and talks about refugee literature, etc., but she gets a lot of pushback from leftists. So, of course, assimilation has now got a different tone to it. So would you like to address that question?
Yeah, it's actually a brilliant question. And it is one that I have been aware of also in recent years and spent a lot of time thinking about. When I talked about this legend sort of acting as a blueprint in my own immigration journey, it was a personal statement. You know, this is the code of ethics that I wish to live by. And this is how I like to conduct my own personal behavior. having said that, I quite understand the pushback against that narrative. All I can say is one thing does not negate the other. I mean, and I have said this publicly in my book talks to predominantly white audiences many a time when this exact issue has come up, that if the immigrant has a responsibility towards the new country, so does the host of that country. So does the host country. It has to be a dance. It has to be like in any relationship. You know, one person cannot make a relationship successful. There is an obligation on the part of the host country too. And then if you really want to get political about it, if you throw in sort of the legacy of imperialism and colonialism and all those isms, then of course the debt that the host country owes to, let's just talk about immigrants from third world countries, is enormous, right? And I think one of the things that's missing, and that's the last thing I'll say as a political statement, one of the things that's missing in this whole illegal immigration debate that we're having right now is that we have conveniently leapfrogged over, 100+ years of American interference, south of the border, right? And that is a one-sided conversation. One cannot talk about people knocking on your door, traumatized people, poor people, asking to be let in, if you don't also talk about the conditions that they are facing and who in large measure is responsible for those conditions.
Oh, thank you, Thrity. There was you getting a lot of comments on your question and your answer. And then there is another question in a different line, which says, which process did you use to publish these books? Did you publish through a literary agent, or did you publish unagented directly to the...
It is virtually impossible in publishing today to approach an editor or a publisher without going through an agent. And frankly, in some ways, and I think Nawaz will attest to this in a few minutes, in some ways it's almost harder finding an agent to take you on than it is to then find a publisher. So I'm not saying that it never ever happens, but if anybody in this audience is interested in publishing, my advice to you would be find an agent that has clients that write the kind of books that you are interested in writing or have written, and approach those people first. Because agents act as a kind of middleman or a kind of clearinghouse, if you will, for the editors, because otherwise they would never be able to go through all the manuscripts that they receive.
So the next question, Thrity, to you is, which leads into advice. What advice would you give people who would like to write their own stories?
The first author.
I think something happened and I couldn't hear you, Aban. Say it again.
What advice would you give to, everybody, we're all storytellers at heart, and we all think, oh, we can pick up a pen and write something. And do you think we should, as a novice, would you advise us to go to a creative writing class, or just keep writing? Should we have a routine, or what is it that you would give an advice to a would-be author that's out there waiting for some good words?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it depends on what you want to do with the writing. If you are only writing for your own pleasure, or even for just a kind of record keeping, you want to know, or just as an outlet for your personal feelings, you can do that with no training at all. I feel like the single easiest, best way, a shortcut to becoming a good writer is to be a good reader, is to read judiciously, is to read widely, and then a little training. Like, I don't have an MFA in writing, which is a path that many writers take, but I was a reader from a very, very young age. I did take some creative writing classes here and there, especially when I was writing my very first novel. one great way to really sort of hone your skill is to find other writers in the community where you live and form a writers group, you know, and you meet once a month and maybe two members take turns exchanging poems or short stories. You ask for feedback and criticism. You have to grow a thick layer of skin because you want honest feedback. And I think that is one of the most effective ways to do peer-reviewed work, and you know, do that.
Well, and then the follow-up question is from Shazneen Gandhi out there, and she says, Thrity, would you possibly offer a course on creative writing for those of us that are, and Shazneen herself has written a very nice children's book too. So, you know, and following up with that, Thrity, is there the words for us?
You know, I won't say no. I'm not, please just know that I do have a day job where I teach full time, and I do teach creative writing, which is, it can be challenging and exhausting at times. So there's a reason why I don't do this also on the side, you know, deliberately. But you know, if there was genuine interest out there and we could put together a group of just sort of doing a writing workshop or something, I would be happy to consider it if time allows.
Yeah, and we have to hold that question too, because I know Nawaz does creative writing classes, but
Right.
hold that question out there as well too. So do you have a typical writing process? Like you get up in the morning at 5 o'clock and write for an hour and then go to teach and write articles in the Boston Globe or whatever you do? I mean, do you balance your day that way?
I used to very much so. When I wrote my first book, Bombay Time, which the great Bapsi Sidhwa, who I didn't know in those days, just met her. I had a one-year fellowship to Harvard, and I wrote the novel while I was there. And Bapsi was good enough to blurb my very first book for me. It was a book that has only Parsi characters, if any of you are interested in checking it out. But when I wrote that, I had a fellowship to Harvard. So, you know, I had very long and busy days fulfilling my commitment to that fellowship. So the only time I had to write was early in the morning. And at one point, I think I was getting up at 4 in the morning just to write for as many hours as I could before I had to get dressed and start my workday and go to school. So I did that for many, many years. You know, for several of my books, the only time I would have to write was early in the morning. And anybody who knows me knows that I'm not genuinely a morning person. So it was a bit of a sacrifice to give up sleep and do that. But there was something quite wonderful about it also. But, you know, the older you get, the more entangled and busy your life gets. So these days, honestly, I just write whenever I can. You know, I usually write because I teach during the week. I write as much as I can on weekends. I most certainly write in the summer. I write late into the night. You would think it would be the opposite, where my process would get more sort of sophisticated and narrow, but it seems more scattershot these days. But even if I have, you know, 15 minutes waiting on a friend to arrive at a restaurant, not in COVID days, but I'm talking about the good old days a year ago, you know, I would write. Just scribble down a few. I've certainly written my first children's book, When I Carried You in My Belly. I wrote the whole thing on the back of a United Airways napkin on a 45-minute, you know, I mean, imagine that. That was good use of time, right? I leave. Thank God I didn't blow my nose on it or something.
But now, Thrity, these are all archival materials. I hope you kept that napkin.
No, the napkin is gone because now it's a book, so who cares about the napkin? But honestly, I wrote the whole book on back of a napkin, you know? So the main thing is, and for people who are interested in writing, I say this to you sincerely, don't look for reasons why you cannot write. Because even that takes up time, coming up with those excuses. It's better to just use that time instead to write, you know?
So another question out here is from Jungle Mystery, who says, Thrity, you mentioned The story has great significance today with immigration being such a hot button issue. How do you plan to give your book the exposure it really needs with adults in the US and all over the world struggling with an immigration issue? So I guess if I may just interject, I think one way is to go out and buy that copy of the book and then have it, circulate it and send it out as gifts as friends. But then I'll let Thrity answer that too.
No, I think you said what I was too ashamed or embarrassed to say. I mean, that is the only way, is I'm counting on all of you to help me spread the word.
So, all right. Thank you, Thrity, for what you've done. Thank you as an author, as a Zartushti woman, for telling our Parsi stories and just, every place we go to, and I didn't even touch on all your books because the adult books are so wonderful and they tug at our emotional strings. And the beauty of that is that you feel that every character that you write, it's you or your mother-in-law or your sister or the maid out there too. And that has been a great gift for all of us. And I want to thank you for that too. So
thank you.
And before we start with Nawaz, I would like for Thrity to say something, ask a question, because I know Thrity is a little bit short on time and she's leaving. So at this time, I would like for Nawaz to be introduced. We've given her a biography, and Nawaz has got so many of these questions we asked Thrity. I think we need to ask the same questions to Nawaz because she too, she's a creative writing, she holds classes, and she's gone through this whole process together. And it's you almost have parallel lives, but being born in Bombay, being published at an early ages and things like that too. So, but as an immigrant, Nawaz has an affinity for diverse characters and facing issues with universal appeal. So her books combine the excitement of mystery and adventure and along with the emotional journey of her personal adversity, building characters that readers can identify. So at this time, let's invite Nawaz and maybe Thrity can ask Nawaz a question.
Okay, I'd love to do that. Aban, I just want to once again thank you sincerely for what you have put together, this whole program. I will try and stay for as long as I can to hear Nawaz. I'm very interested in hearing what she has to say. And Nawaz, this is my question to you. So clearly there was an unimaginable amount of research, I suspect, that went into writing your book, Murder in Old Bombay. So what was your favorite part of the whole process, from start? Was it the research? Was it the writing? Was it something that I'm not thinking of? What do you think it was?
Wonderful question. So before I answer that, I want to show you this. I just had to reach out and get your book off my shelf right there. It's a lovely book. My parents have loved this book. And if folks haven't read it, If Today Be Sweet is a darling read. Okay, so what's a favorite part of writing for me is the first draft. I work in 5 stages. There's a concept phase where I'm all over the place. I do a lot of journaling. There's research, which isn't a distinct phase. I'm always doing research, but I start to do the outline. And then there's the drafting phase. And then of course, there's editing and revising, which is endless. It repeats, pass after pass. But that drafting phase is when you actually kind of know what the scene is going to be, but you're looking at an empty page and it's like a video in your head that you're trying to get down in words. That is an addicting process for me. The first book I did in about 4 months when people had to really, bug me to eat. And I would essentially forget to cook. And thank God for my husband and take out. And I would realize at 4 a.m. that, oh my God, look at the time. It's 4 a.m. I better sleep. I was not working full time at the time. I was doing some consulting and I decided this is what I want to do. If I can't stop doing it, this better be my career. So I switched to writing at that point. Yeah.
So, Nawaz, tell us a little bit about Nawaz's book is going to be published a month from now. So it's going to be, but you can order it, pre-order it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and anywhere where booksellers do sell books. And unfortunately, we don't have too many books, companies that sell books nowadays, you know. But please do that. I want to tell you that when I got Nawaz's galley copy of her book, I usually, when I'm doing a book review or any kind of a thing, I have a post-it and I write down little things to say, you know, this is a key point that I need to write about. But for Nawaz's book, each chapter it moved so fast. I was just turning the pages over. I forgot to write any notes because I wanted to get to the end, and it's a long book. And Nawaz, I thoroughly enjoyed the book. So tell us a little bit about the book without giving away the end, but show us what your whole process has been for writing this book. So Nawaz, you're on.
Sure, happy to do that. So I'm actually going to show you a 30-second trailer that the publisher Macmillan put together. It's only 30 seconds, so if it bombs, you've not lost anything. We're going to go into a few slides because I love to show visuals. Let's see if this works, okay? All right, I'm hoping that you were able to see the quick little video there.
We did.
Wonderful. So let me just close up something here and go into a few slides. So I love to tell the story really through some visuals. In my research, I came across a lot of photographs, beautiful photographs, and they're free. They're on Pinterest, they're on Google Images, and some of them are from National Archives. And they informed how I imagined the characters. So I'm going to tell you about the start of the book through those pictures. So let's share again. And it's this one. Okay, wonderful. So let me start with a big thank you to my writers group. Thrity mentioned how very, very important it is to have peers. And this was my local library group. We met once a week for about, I've been with them 4 years, but they were very kind. And they went through all my chapters one at a time. I have about 70 very short chapters. So this group actually tolerated the book for 70 weeks. And they contributed enormously. A lot of the fixing was done right here in this room, and they were marvelous. 3 of them actually did deep dives, so I have to say this book was an enormous collaboration. So here's the cover by Macmillan. It is coming November 10th, and it just blew me away. Go ahead. Let's see, yeah, this book won the Mystery Writers of America award. It's the first time actually that an Indian-born writer has won the award. So that was quite exciting. It's a little astonishing because if you're a rookie actor and you're suddenly invited to the Oscar Awards, you start to think, what am I doing here? That was my feeling when I went to the Edgar Awards. And that award also then came with a publishing contract. And I had been looking for an agent for months. I'd even talked to Thrity about, trying to find an agent. And it was a very frustrating process, but this award then just jump-started my career. So let's talk about the book, right? The book is set in India, and India is very present on every page, but it's colonial India, which had a very, very peculiar setup. If you look at the map, there are all these blue sections, and they were princely states. They were not directly ruled by the British. So the white areas, Bombay Presidency, Central Province, Sindh, Punjab, these were ruled very directly by British administrators. But in these very large tracts of land, you did have these 500 princely states that had all kinds of rules and laws, and the princes were pretty much the law and order in those states. And you also had large swaths of rural and, very, very wild country, mountains and tribal people. And in the northeast, there was the great game being played between the British, administration really trying to prevent Russia from invading through the Punjab. So Afghanistan was that borderland that really didn't have a border, and you had constant skirmishes. If you look on, Wikipedia, you'll find there are 3 distinct Anglo-Afghan wars, but there were skirmishes all the time during this time period. So 1892 is just before the turn of the century, and it's a time of enormous change, much like what we're going through today, right? A period of enormous technological change. And here's where my story really starts. So it's based on a real crime, a real series of events, where this couple, sweet young girls, 20-year-old Bacha and 16-year-old Pilu, did really die. They fell from the top of that tower that you see on the left-hand side, and they fell to their deaths, about 200 feet, give or take. And they were, in the middle of the day. Nobody knew why they had committed suicide or had been attacked, or nobody knew why. I didn't get this picture of them until Dolly sent it to me. So thank you, Dolly Nastur. I thought Bacha might look like this lady in the middle. This is unidentified Parsi lady painted by Raja Ravi Verma in the early 1900s. And you can see she has a very nostalgic sort of, solemn look. She's wearing these beautiful pearls. She's a pretty girl, but she's kind of somber and sad. And I always thought maybe Bacha kind of looked like her. So in these upcoming photographs, you're going to see what I thought the character looked like, and then some photographs of what the real people in the actual events, what they looked like. So I created a detective. He's totally fictitious. And that's kind of what I thought he looked like. I made him Anglo-Indian for a reason. I wanted somebody who would kind of be able to walk around in both worlds, the polite world, the society world, as well as the Indian world, the rural world, to be somebody who knew English as well as, the local languages, and could just seamlessly move around. And I made him, I needed a tough guy for the detective, so I made him an ex-soldier. He's a boxer, but he's also got some, trauma that he is trying to recover from. And he's kind of an interesting character, but because he has this odd name, James and Agnihotri, right, English and then Indian, he faces a lot of discrimination, and he kind of became the fulcrum for which the book turns on. So in the process of his inquiries, he's doing this investigation, he faces a lot of discrimination, and we see how he gets along despite that. So his story is the search for truth and discovering what happened in the mystery, but it's also his search for something to belong to. So as the story opens, book opens, Captain Jim is recovering from injuries, and he's reading about this crime of the 2 girls' deaths in the newspapers. And he gets curious and then intrigued, and he's a fan of Sherlock Holmes, so he starts noticing anomalies in the case. And when one of the widowers writes a letter in the newspapers, it just really tugs at his heartstrings, and he resonates for him in a personal way. So he decides to take a job as a reporter. and that involves him in all kinds of shenanigans. So that's the opening of the story. He goes to see this widower, right? And so I thought the guy on the left is, I thought, the person he was going to go see. Ardeshir Godrej, the real widower in this case. He is the founder, he was the founder of what is now Godrej Enterprises, Godrej Conglomerate. He was 22 years old at the time. He was a young law student, and they had been married only 1 year. So he lost his bride in this very terrible and traumatic way. And I was fascinated by this guy, Ardeshir Godrej. So I did a ton of research, read actually 2 biographies of him, and he is incredible. This guy's an innovator, but how do you recover from a loss like this? So I started to think about this very intelligent young man. I thought maybe he hired a detective and figured it out and didn't tell anybody, but that might have given him some resolution to go forward in his life. Now, we don't know. This is pure speculation. But I started with the chapter I wrote first was him meeting a young soldier who's asking questions. That was the first chapter I wrote. So this is where the story starts, and then I had to add in a little wild card. So I invented a sister for Adi. I know he had a number of siblings, but I don't know that he ever had a sibling like this. Diana Framji. I created this character, and she's kind of a spunky girl. She is very perceptive. She is English educated, so she understands how government works. She eavesdrops and finds information for him, and she kind of gets a little fascinated by him. She's based on this character on the right, Cornelia Sorabji, who was actually Oxford-educated lawyer in the 1800s, in the late 1880s and 1890s, and she was not allowed to pass the bar, the real Cornelia Sorabji, because women were not allowed to take the bar. So she worked for the Court of Wards, and she wrote 5 books, which were wonderful research for me. I also read, for my research, I also read books by British administrators. There are tracts, there are PhD theses on these colonial times and how the relationship between the races, how that worked out. So she gave me a lot of good foundational research information, including what you would call people at the time. So I have a lot of localisms because of her book. But Diana really became quite important in the story. So this time period is just about 30 years after the Sepoy Mutiny, right? So these are beautiful pictures from the London's National Archives, the National Museum in London. And that is Digton Probyn on the left-hand side. He looks like a Punjabi Sikh guy. He's actually a Britisher, he's an Englishman. And then here you have Thomas Kavanagh being disguised during the siege of Lucknow. This is during the Sepoy Mutiny. So these are actual portraits of people who won the Victoria Cross. And this is fascinating to me because I have Captain Jim wandering around in disguise. And I wanted to find out, were there real characters that could do this, real historical people that could wander around in India dressed as Indians and get away with it? And it turns out, at least in 2 cases, more than 2, that is what happened. So one other very interesting character is Sir Charles Forgett. I don't have a photograph of him. This is another portrait of the mutiny, the guns and so on. But Charles Forgett, I want to point out, he used to be Inspector of Police in Bombay Presidency during the 1857 Sepoy Mutiny. And not many people know that the mutiny had come all the way to Kolhapur. That's only like very, very close. It's a few hundred miles maybe away from Mumbai. And so the citizens of Bombay would have been quite afraid. And Charles Forgett used to wander around in disguise. This is an Englishman wandering around in disguise. He was born and brought up in India, so he knew all Marathi, Hindi, Gujarati. And he actually spoiled the mutineers from attacking and from rebelling in Bombay Presidency. But I based my character of James Agnihotri a little bit on this guy. Quite an interesting character. And then, of course, you have India, right? How can you not have India? So on the left, you have some civil servants or some, the administrator on the bottom left. You have your redcoats, soldiers that were you know, a lot of them were British. I should point out that about 5,000 officers were English, were white, and 95,000 sepoys and other ranks were Indian in the British Indian Army. So you have the officers there, they play a part in the story. You have, you know, these little boys. There's an episode where Jim interacts with certain urchins, and I just have such vivid memories of these naughty little boys that run around there. So I included them in the story. There's poverty, there's no question about that. You have a woman at the bottom cooking on a chula. And so Jim is an investigator, he is trying to find the truth, but reality intervenes, like in our lives, right? You want something, but stuff happens. So he keeps getting derailed by stuff happening in India. And at the top right, I want to point out the enormous luxury that we had Maharajas living in, and you know, nobles of India, and they were a little bit of a law unto themselves. They did some good things, they did some very bad things. So you have a mix of people that represent India. And there are a lot of Indian subcultures in the story. The caste system is a little bit there, but many of the different subcultures are involved. So the story starts really with Jim trying to figure out what happened. So he goes to the tower. I actually visited the tower. I went up that tower. It is closed to the public, and it should be. It's a horrible experience to climb up that tower. It's claustrophobic. It was terrifying. The only thing that allowed me to get all the way up is that nobody was behind me, so I could turn around and get down if I wanted. If somebody had been behind me, I think I would have panicked. I don't think I could have kept going. It's very suffocating in that tower, getting up to the gallery. So I'm glad it's close to the public, but I went to the actual place. I got special permission to see what was going on. So on the left, you see the tower and this funny Gothic you know, scroll work building. On the right is the reading room, which is adjacent to it. And in the real crime, the actual events, just before the girls died, there was an altercation between 3 men witnessed on that very balcony. So I took a close-up of the balcony. You see it on the right-hand side. You see how close it is to the tower. Something was going on just before the 2 girls died. There was a fight between 3 men. And that became part of the real case. One of those guys, Parsi, called Manikji Aslaji, was actually tried for murder. And he got off, he was acquitted because there were no witnesses. And in the middle, you see the entrance to the reading rooms. You see how broad and beautiful and grand it is. And I walked around this entire place imagining the actual events happening. So Jim's journey takes him all over India. He goes to Lahore to try and find somebody. This is a beautiful oil painting of the gate and the street scene. And these are informed my descriptions so that they're kind of vivid and you feel like you're there. On the left is Anarkali Street. I've never been there, but it forms a part of the book. And then he gets into these other adventures where there's a British administrator in Simla who asks for his help, and then he gets involved with these Afridi tribesmen. So these are actual pictures from the 1890s of, you see the long Jazail rifle there, you know, of these tribesmen overlooking, you know, some kind of terrain. And then there's this creepy looking fort, which is actually Lohargarh Fort near Pune, but that informed me a little bit of what, you know, it helped me visualize and describe some of the creepy locations that I have Jim wandering around trying to figure out things in. And then of course there's beautiful areas as well, so, you know, drawing rooms of Bombay, the princely Darbar halls. This is Hyderabad, the Nizam of Hyderabad's throne room on the right hand side. Gorgeous locations as well as very primitive and rural and rough and wonderful wilderness. All are in the book. So the task is ultimately catch the killers and come home. But remember where we started? He's an orphan, he's mixed breed. You know, the British didn't like the mixing of the races. Indians didn't like the mixing of the races. You have discrimination going on. So where's home? If you have to catch the killers and come home, there has to be a place to come home to. And that ultimately forms the heart of the book. It's the big story The big question is, after all he does, after all his efforts and sacrifice, after all that, will he ever be truly accepted, or will he never overcome the accident of his birth, which is his race? So I do have a proposed solution to the mystery based on pressures of the time, the divided loyalties of the time. And the book has, lots of elements to it. It's a mystery, but it's full of surprises. It's action-packed, it's got adventure, there's a love story in it. It is a bit of an epic because of all the different locations and wide landscapes. And yeah, it's a nostalgic tale of Bombay. So it sounds like a lot, but when you read it, you might agree that it's actually more. So it's coming soon. It's available November 10th. And I'm actually going to read you 2 pages of the book. So give me just a moment here. Okay. I'm going to try sharing this. Let's see if this works. The Widower's Letter. Pune, February 1892. I turned 30 in hospital, in a quiet carbolic-scented ward with little to read but newspapers. Recuperating from my injuries, a slow and tedious business, I developed an obsession with a recent story. All of India was shocked by the deaths of 2 young women who fell from the university clock tower in broad daylight. The more I read about it, the more this matter puzzled me. 2 well-to-do young women plunged to their deaths in the heart of Bombay, a bustling city under the much-touted British law and order. Some called it suicide, but there seemed to be more to it. Most suicides die alone. These ladies hadn't, not exactly. 3 men had just been tried for murder. I wondered, what the hell happened? Major Stephen Smith of the 14th Light Cavalry Regiment entered the ward, empty but for me, ambling as one accustomed to horseback. Taking off his white pith helmet, he mopped his forehead. It was warm in Pune this February. I said, "Hello, Stephen." He paused, brightened, and handed me a package tied in string. "Happy birthday, Jim. How do you feel?" The presents I'd received in my life I could count on one hand. Waving him to the bedside chair, I peeled the brown paper back and grinned at the book. Stephen had heard me talk often enough about my hero. "The Sign of 4, Sherlock Holmes." He nodded at the newspapers piled about my bed. "Interested in the case?" Seen this? I tapped the Chronicle of India I'd scoured these past hours. Trial of the century, they called it. Blighters were acquitted. Outside, palm trees swished with a warm tropical gust. He sat, his khaki uniform stark, in the whitewashed ward, smoothing a finger over his blonde mustache. "Been in the news for weeks. Court returned a verdict of suicide." I scoffed. "Suicide, bollocks." Smith frowned. Why ever not? "The details don't line up. They didn't fall from the clock tower at the same time, but minutes apart. If they'd planned to die together, wouldn't they have leapt from the clock tower together? And look here, the husband of one of the victims wrote to the editor." I folded the newspaper to the letter and handed it over. It read, "Sir, what you proposed in yesterday's editorial is impossible. Neither my wife Bacha nor my sister Pilu had any reason to commit suicide. They had simply everything to live for. Were you to meet Bacha, you could not mistake her vibrant joie de vivre. She left each person she met with more than they had before. No, sir, this was not a woman prone to melancholia, as you suggest, but an intensely beautiful and fun-loving beauty, kind in her attention to all she met, generous in her care of elders, and admired by many friends. Sir, I beg you do not besmirch the memory of my dear wife and sister with foolish rumors. Their loss has taken the life from our family, the joy from our lives. Leave us in peace. They are gone, but I remain. Sincerely, Adi Framji, February 10th, 1892.
Oh, that was a fascinating journey that you took us through with all your research and I'm telling you, it's a page turner, this book. And already I see people have commented in the chat that they've already ordered. Thrity's gone and ordered a copy of the book. But I want to ask you a question that you have 4 manuscripts under your belt. And why did you particularly choose this one over the other 3?
So this is the 5th book I wrote. The first 4 were really historical stories. Some might have been considered a historical romance. This was the first one set in India. And the first one I was addicted to. I mean, writing is always very engaging, but I couldn't stop thinking about this one. So when I had to enter a book in this Mystery Writers of America contest, this is the one.
Oh, fabulous, fabulous. And then there's a question in the chat file box to say, what is your next book going to be? So I know, would you like to share a little bit on that one, Nawaz?
Absolutely. Oh, yes. So I am 75% done with book 2. I have a very tough agent. She's wonderful. And she has me on a schedule of 3 chapters per week. So I'm enjoying it, but this go around, I've got a little bit more control over it. The book has not hijacked me yet. But the second book is really about the similar characters, the same characters, but in a different mystery and a different adventure.
So, do you have a routine that you follow, that you get up in the morning and write, or is it just sporadic? Or it couldn't be sporadic with all the research that you do and all the facts that you look for. So can you share a little bit on that?
Yeah, it depends upon what phase I'm in. So if I'm in the concept phase or the research phase, I do a lot of nonprofit work. I do a lot of teaching. I do a lot of reading. I pay attention to my family. So it's very much loose in terms of a schedule. But I do get tons of stuff from the library. I'm going there every week, plowing through stuff. I started recording things I want to use. And then when I want too much from a book, I end up buying it. So I just end up buying books. But then when I'm in the drafting phase, I try to keep Mondays, sometimes it bleeds into Tuesdays, for business. So I have promotion work, replying to emails, actual work I teach on Mondays too. And then the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm trying to knock down those 3 chapters. But sometimes it ends up being Saturday or Sunday at 12 o'clock in the night or 2 a.m. that I actually get those 3 chapters done. I'm not satisfied with just getting them. They have to be in a halfway decent state. It's still just laying down the brickwork. It's just the bones of the story. All the layers haven't yet been built up because it's the first draft, but that still has to be readable by Jill, and she's pretty tough. So she's wonderful. She and I have this debrief of whatever I sent her the previous week. We have a debrief on Monday, 2 hours, where she will really go through line by line sometimes. And I keep telling her, it's a first draft. I will fix all that. And that's my routine. The revising and the editing, I'm a little bit more regimented about that. I can take chunks of time to do it and balance my other work. The draft phase is the hardest for me, but it's also the most enjoyable.
So Nawaz, you had a regular job for the first few years of your career, and then you decided consciously to give that up and seek your passion and go full-time into writing. So what is the message that you want to send out to would-be writers? What is the message?
The message is you must do what's right for you, right? You must decide for yourself when you can take a risk, because writing is a risk. There are thousands of writers and few make it to mid-list and very, very few ever to A-list. So if it gives you joy, do it. But in terms of your career choices, you must decide what's right for you. In our case, we had financial pressures and responsibilities, and I chose to, abide by them first, pay attention to them first. And at some point, my husband and I, had this conversation that writing gives me so much joy. Can we now pivot so that he'll carry a little bit more of the burden, the financial burden, and allow me the opportunity to play? And I have to hand it to him. He did. He said, all right, have fun, play.
So both of you authors are getting really great commendations and praises for your work. And I too want to thank you for, on behalf of the community, you are spreading the word of Zoroastrianism and spreading our philosophy and our life's, faith and culture. So that is a wonderful thing. We thank you for that too. And there's so many little comments that people want to, send them to you. Are you available on, shall I share email so you can get the things to you, or would that be a imposition? Because so many of them have written very nice things to you and they want to hear back from you. So, and they're just simple things like, it's hard for me to teach an academic subject and to switch to a creative writing class. What do you advise? So they're kind of personal things. Would you allow that kind of correspondence with the people that are attending today?
Absolutely. So nevmarchauthor@gmail.com is an email that I made just so that I can interact with readers. And you're welcome to write me an email, nevmarchauthor@gmail.com. Nevmarch was taken, so I had to do Nevmarch Author.
So why did you pick this moniker? Why did you not go for, is that a question that I may ask?
Absolutely, it's a great question. So here's the thing. If you are willing, if you are willing to read a book by somebody who has a W in the middle of their name, Nawaz, you are already an elevated soul, and you do not really need the message in my book about discrimination. But I wanted to remove barriers from people to allow them to feel that the book is more accessible, to feel that the book is less alien or unusual or foreign. I wanted to give them a book that they would just pick off and just start to read the story, because I want them to first enjoy the story, and second, to really read the message of discrimination. Like, what does it feel like to be discriminated against, and how do you survive? How do you manage? How do you find your way in that situation? So if a person truly empathizes with my character, I hope that it will change the way they think. And so I wanted to lower barriers to the message. And I was willing to sacrifice my name in that, for that greater goal. And so to make it more accessible to just the mainstream public, I shortened it to Nawaz Merchant. I used the first part of the first name and the first part of the second name, made it Nev March.
Oh, all right. So I think we're running out of our allocated time. And even though there's so many questions, I do want to thank you, both of you authors, for taking the time and coming on to the FEZANA talks and sharing your viewpoints. It's just absolutely been delightful. Thank you very much for doing this. I want to thank FEZANA and FEZANA Talks, and especially Arzan, for creating this new initiative, a new platform where we can come together and discuss different things. I want to thank my FIRES committee, who've sort of held my hand through all this whole process of, guiding me as to what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And Yasmin Pavri, who's sitting out here working with me on the chat questions. And with that, till the next talk. And Arzan, do you want to just say something at the very end?
Sure. So on behalf of FEZANA, I would like to thank Aban and the entire FIRES team for putting this together, and of course to Thrity and Nawaz. I think what probably wasn't said is Nawaz is also the co-chair of the FEZANA Funds and Finance Committee, and has been a very integral part of FEZANA and also of her local association, which also happens to be my local association, which is ZAGNI. So, it's good to see a familiar face, but then it's also great to have somebody of the stature of Thrity, who, most of us have read her books, but I think this is probably only the second time I'm ever hearing her speak in person. So thank you, both of you, and thank you to all nearly 100 people who signed up and took time off on their Saturday mornings or evenings to do this. Our next talk is going to be at the end of the month. It's October 31st, and it also again has a Houston connection. We are going to have the hospitality legend Sam Bhada, who's going to be in conversation with Cyrus Mystery. And so that should be an interesting topic where, he talks about, I think the title, we're working on the title, but it's an interesting title where hospitality is not just chocolate under the pillow. So, mark your calendars, October 31st, will be that. And then just after the US elections, we are hoping to have a conversation on social justice and what social justice means within the realm of what Zoroastrian scriptures teach us, and how that can be current today. So we'll have some interesting panelists for that too. With that, I thank everybody for being on this call. We will have a video recording of this in a couple of days. So if you couldn't catch parts of it, or if you wanted to go back and hear again, you will have the ability to do so. Thank you all, and goodbye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Aban. Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank all of you too.